It is bright up here. Latvian. Thank you very much. I will say that I am humbled to be here today. It is an honor and a pleasure to be at any cybersecurity conference, frankly, but particularly here in Latvia. And I'm going to underline the here in Latvia piece a little bit in a second. I'd like to note that in addition to European Cybersecurity Month, October is also Canada's Cybersecurity Month. Our theme this year is Fight Phishing, Give a Criminal a Bad Day. Criminals, of course, come in many shapes these days, and I'll talk about that a little bit through my presentation as well. Cybersecurity is an important topic. I'm passionate about it. You're clearly passionate about it because you're here. But at this time in particular, I think it's really worth talking about some of the threats we face, because as our previous two speakers have both mentioned, the environment in which we live, operate, and spend our time day to day has shifted. Russia's illegal invasion of the Ukraine has significantly shifted the global security situation writ large, let alone the cybersecurity aspects that go along with that. You don't need a Canadian to stand up here and talk about the threat that Russia poses. I think Latvia, by the nature of your geography, feels that viscerally in a way that your Minister of National Defense sort of highlighted that perhaps not everyone in the rest of the West does. But I would like to say that, and I'll talk about what Canada is doing here in a little bit, there certainly is an understanding that this is important, that this is an important place to be. It's not an accident that Canada chose to be in Latvia, and it's not an accident that I chose to be here today. And that's going to be sort of how I kick off my presentation today. I'm going to walk through sort of three things. I'm going to talk about sort of a question that no one is impolite enough to ask out loud, but might be shaped as why on earth is he here? I'm going to move to talk a little bit about cybersecurity as perhaps the ultimate team sport. And then I'm going to end with a few thoughts on what I think is the magic ingredient that makes cybersecurity work, and its trust. So let me start with why me. So I am the Canadian Joint Force Cyber Component Commander, and what I'd like to do is just pull apart the various different words that build up that title. I'm going to talk about Canadian, I'm going to talk about military, I'm going to talk about cyber component, but I'll do it in a little bit different order than my title has. So Canadian. Let me start with beware of your source. I am Canadian. But I think it matters that I'm Canadian and that we're here. Canada, through the enhanced forward presence in NATO, and in particular a battle group that has been here for many years now, has invested significantly in a relationship with the country of Latvia and the people of Latvia. That started and indeed has largely been predicated in military channels. What we've seen over the last year, I think, is a very healthy and very effective expansion of that relationship, coming out of a strong base, but moving into the cybersecurity domain with a strong relationship with CERT.LV. We've been providing support to CERT.LV for some time. We've been working with them. I think it's important to know that one of the reasons why there's a Canadian standing here instead of someone else is because of that very strong friendship. That very strong friendship that as CERT.LV decided to put together the outstanding conference you stand in today, they leaned on some of our folks that were embedded to ensure that this kind of event got placed on my calendar, a decision that I hope they're not regretting now. So Canadian matters. I'm going to move on a little bit out of order to talk about a cyber component, about what does it mean that Canada has a cyber component, about what makes up a cyber component, and about, again, why that means I'm here today. So a cyber component is much like an Army, Navy, or Air Force component, except we don't get tanks or ships or planes or any nice-looking things like that. Instead, what we get are cybersecurity professionals, and some very talented ones. And as the cyber component commander, one of my key jobs, in fact, arguably the key job, is force generating, that is, training and ensuring that they're ready for deployment, cybersecurity experts to go do the business of the Government of Canada in cyber defense and in cyber operations. I'll talk a little bit about how we do that. It's not surprising. It's not rocket science. It's cybersecurity, which is arguably harder than rocket science. We find and train experts and less than experts in cybersecurity. We recruit military uniformed folks. We run them through a training regime, and then we look for opportunities, much like the conference here today, to deepen their skill sets and their ability to operate. From this group of talent, we put together cyber task forces, based initially around something we called cyber protection teams. Cyber protection team, if you're in the US, is about 39 people. If you're in Canada, it's about 4. But the idea is not necessarily all that different. They're the basic building block around which we build capability. But what we've found is that no cybersecurity task looks the same as the last one. So the cyber protection teams that we build are almost never fit for purpose for any real-world problem. But they are the building blocks from which we construct cyber task forces. And that's what we have here today in Latvia, is a cyber task force. A cyber task force that is varied in size from as small as 1 to as large as about 25, depending on what the requirements were here in Latvia for cybersecurity support. It's not all that different than the way we put together teams to respond to incidents in Canada, largely incidents on our own military networks. But also we've operated elsewhere and have provided support to the government of Ukraine as well. So what that means is that as the cyber component commander, as the members that were supporting CERT.LV looked for someone's calendar in which to insert this particular event, it ended up in my calendar and not some other Canadian general, so that's why you're suffering through me. What I want to switch to next is the military piece. And this is where there are significant differences between nations in the West and significant difference between nations within NATO. In Canada, the military and the Department of Defense is not the lead agency for cybersecurity for the Government of Canada. In fact, we work very closely and have a deep partnership, and I'll come back to that deep partnership in a second, with the Canadian Centre for Cybersecurity, which is the entity in our government that's most directly analogous to, excuse me, sorry, to CERT.LV. So why are we here? Why are we here instead of our partners from the Canadian Centre for Cybersecurity? Well, let me answer that 2 ways, to say that certainly we have worked with our Centre for Cybersecurity as well, but also, much as in the other domains, I mentioned Army, Navy, Air Force, in Canada we do not build cyber forces specifically for the kinds of tasks that we've come to do here. We build military cyber forces in order to ensure that our military is capable of fighting and winning in war in a cyber-contested environment. On the other hand, we don't build military forces to help with forest fires, floods, or hurricanes either, and yet I can tell you that the Canadian Armed Forces is frequently called upon to use capacities and capabilities that it's built for other purposes in order to support our country as well as other countries around the globe. And frankly, what you're seeing right now is the same thing in cyberspace. Capacity and capability that we built to do one thing is better focused on other ways to achieve security for our country and our allied countries within NATO. And that is to take some of that capacity and use it to backstop Latvia's actually outstanding CERT. And I'll come back to what backstop means in a second. So anyway, that's why it's a military uniform. We built military capacity to do military things that is now useful in order to deliver broader civil security results. It's me because the cyber component is the entity in the Canadian Armed Forces that trains, raise, train, and sustain is the US phrase, but trains and prepares cyber operators for operations, and because I am Canadian. I'm going to shift slightly. I'm going to move into the second part of my talk today. I'm going to stick with sort of a military theme or title, but what I want to talk about now is cyber a little bit as the ultimate team sport. You know, as the threat from, frankly, the threat from Russia increased, dating not just from the invasion of Ukraine more recently, but frankly all the way back to 2014 and the events in Crimea, Canada realized that its national security, the national security of the liberal democratic West, was fundamentally dependent on NATO. And as part of NATO's efforts to strengthen itself after a number of years focused elsewhere globally, set up and established the Enhanced Forward Presence Battle Group here in Latvia. NATO, though, is another example of the importance of team. You know, it's interesting. I stumbled across this idea of cyber as the ultimate team sport with no bench limit, no limit on the number of players you're allowed to have on the field. A long time ago in a presentation from General Keith Alexander, who at the time was about to become the first commander of US Cyber Command. That idea is well held within militaries. It is absolutely accepted that allies are the key to strength. And in fact, NATO as a group of allies is the key to that building of the team. NATO provides perhaps a very useful starting point to build the bench for that ultimate team sport. And I'd point to the CCDOE just north of here as a good example of NATO attempting to expand into that. But I would say as I look as a cyber component commander at the breadth of the team that I have beyond Canada, it's not just NATO. There's a number of other bilateral and multilateral agreements with other close military allies and partners. A clear and often unstated one, of course, for Canada is the United States, which plays a very key role in our national security. But also I would point to the Latvian CERT. I've said a number of times that Canada has come in order to support, I think I've used the phrase backstop. There's an implication in that Canada has come to do something for the CERT. But I think it's really important to note that that's not a one-way exchange. In fact, the nature of the ultimate team sport is that that is absolutely a two-way exchange. Canada has gained enormously from its interactions here in Latvia. Indeed, one of the key ways that we have built some of the expertise, that we have trained some of our operators, is to leverage the opportunities here in Latvia. It is a partnership, not a supporting relationship between the two. I'm going to expand a little bit further to talk about some of our civilian partners. First of all, within government, I already mentioned the Canadian Centre for Cybersecurity. It is almost inconceivable to me that as a military cyber operator in Canada that I would do much of anything without a close relationship, close partnership, and the involvement of our partners at the Canadian Centre for Cybersecurity. There are other partners, of course, across government, and I already mentioned that this month, as it is here, is the focus of cybersecurity in Cybersecurity Month. But it's more than just government. There's a number of much broader elements and partnerships, and I thought it was interesting in Baiba's introduction the number of civil companies that are playing an important role here, just as they are in our own country. The tools we use, many of the training systems we leverage, much of the expertise is developed in more agile, small companies, and then frankly absorbed into larger companies as we move ahead. We rely enormously on cybersecurity products, cybersecurity expertise, and for that matter, the cybersecurity that thankfully is increasingly being integrated into the IT services that we consume across the board in the military environment. Finally, and something that was hinted at by Baiba, but I'd like to make explicit, is the crucial nature that academia and the research community play in this space. As a cyber component commander, I have a much more intimate relationship with our Royal Military College and the research branches of the Canadian Armed Forces than my colleagues in either Army, Navy, or Air Force do. The bottom line is we live, we work in an environment that is not yet solved. It is not yet clear. So many of the questions that we would like to ask ourselves end up with either muddled or very difficult answers that the research academics and frankly the people who have time to just think through these problems are essential. So I don't mean that as you build the team you should pick one or two of those. What I really mean is that cyber as a ultimate team sport allows you to have all of those on your team. And that, certainly we have found, is the key to success and moving forward. But it's also way too simple. That sounds easy. Get lots of partnerships. Make sure that you can have lots of different logos on your slide, and you will be good to go from a cybersecurity perspective. But I think when I frame it that way, that's ridiculous to hopefully everyone in the room. And the answer is there's a key missing piece. And for that, I'd like to transition to sort of the third piece of my presentation here today, which is to talk a little bit about the nature of trust in our business. You know, in the military, within NATO, we have systems that allow our various nations to subordinate our military capabilities to each other. We hand over command and control of our forces to broader and larger structures within the NATO construct. We don't do that in cybersecurity. We don't do that in cybersecurity for a whole pile of reasons, but I'd like to kind of pull the thread on what I think is one of the most important ones, and that is the nature of trust. And that is that what I have found is in cybersecurity operations and in military cyber operations, the need for trust is not a generalized one. It's not a need for generalized trust between two bureaucracies or two organizations or two nations, but it is a very personal need for trust. This is a technical domain, but it surprises me just how much of our mutual effectiveness demands an incredibly tight personal connection. It's one of the reasons why I'm so excited to be here at a conference post-COVID, as we begin to gather in person and begin to get to know each other in sort of that more intimate kind of way. And I'd like to highlight that one of the challenges we've found is this need for two different kinds of trust. There's the kind of trust that certainly outside of a cybersecurity community, everybody would have immediately jumped to. And that is the trust that I can believe you. I can take you at your word. You will protect my confidences. We can work together. That sort of trustworthiness. And that is absolutely essential. And like I said, in this business, it seems to be inordinately demanding of a level of personal knowledge and personal trust. It's amazing how distrustful as a community we tend to be. Perhaps it's because we live in deception all day, every day, that we expand that sort of deception onto our peers and comrades. But I would say that it is difficult and challenging. But there's a second kind of trust, and it's a trust that, frankly, as we launched some of our earliest operations, we hadn't really thought through properly, and that's competence trust. This is a domain where pretty much no one believes your accreditations. No one believes that you can do what you say you can do until you show them. It is important that we take the time to show each other competence, to build that trust in each other's ability to do what we say we're going to do. And again, perhaps it's because we're an extremely skeptical group as a profession, but I find we need to do that in this space an awful lot more than I ever had to when I was a communications officer working on radios and satellite communications. I would highlight that need for trust isn't just a feel-good kind of statement. You know, the statement that organizations move at the speed of trust is incredibly true. Cyber operations can move lightning fast. They can be global and dispersed in nature if the trust exists. If the trust doesn't exist, two people sitting right next to each other will get nowhere. So what do we do about it? Well, I think one of my personal observations is that from a military operations perspective, we need to start building in that understanding. We need to start building in deliberately a phase where we spend some time to build trust in each other. I believe that the relationship that we've built with the Latvian CERT, and for that matter, through the Enhanced Forward Presence Battle Group with Latvia in general, is incredibly useful and helpful and has been essential to the successes that we have achieved. I believe that it means, certainly from a military perspective, we will need to continue to emphasize skill sets in cyber operators that seem not immediately obvious, and to some outside of the community, even counterintuitive. And that is the soft skills, the interpersonal skills, end up being every bit as important and every bit as essential to effective cyber operations as the harder, pure technical bits and bytes skills are. Well, okay, not quite true. Without the technical skills, we don't get anywhere. But they're still an awful lot more important than you might think they are. I think with that, I'm going to wrap up. I'm going to give some time here for some questions from the audience. Hopefully by then I'll be able to see you. And end with, I am sincerely honored to be here. It is a pleasure to be in Latvia for an in-person cybersecurity conference during Cybersecurity Month. Thank you very much. Plodias.
Oh, Dias. Wow. Thank you.
Hopefully that was close.
Oh, yes. You were very close. We understood, definitely. So, please, any questions, remarks, thoughts, maybe challenges? We can challenge him. He's a military. He knows how to deal with challenges.
Excellent. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes.
Should I? Yes.
Oscars. Yeah. I actually have tried to formulate this question in my head while Artis Pabriks minister was talking, and Ansis asked for the question, but maybe it's even more appropriate to you. And the essence of the question is about the research in the area of cybersecurity. Or looking from the military perspective, should military invest in funding research, building teams? Should military rely on the businesses? Should both of those rely on academia doing it? Are they all kind of for the same goal, or might be those researches differ in the areas?
Thank you.
So I guess in line with one of the themes of my presentation, I just highlight again that I think cybersecurity is a team sport. And the more people you can bring to the team, the more effective you're going to be. So should the military have partnerships and engagements with academia, civil organizations, other government entities. Absolutely, I believe that. Each nation will need to figure out its own balance for where it chooses to put defense and military capabilities. Certainly in Canada, for day-to-day life of Canadians, we're in a secondary role. And I have no issue with that. We support and have a very strong relationship more broadly. To pull apart a second sort of part of your question about are there unique military things in cyberspace that we need to look at from a business, perhaps a product or a research lens, again to that I would say absolutely. You know, if I go back to my kind of primary raison d'etre, the reason why I have capabilities that are able to be reassigned, if you will, to other kinds of more civil-oriented tasks is to ensure that militaries can fight and win battles, even when their use of cyberspace is contested. You know, the Western way of war relies very heavily on a technology focus that is more vulnerable than we assumed for a very long time. It's interesting that many of the things that use information communications technologies have embedded them in ways that are complex to understand and even more complex to defend and move forward with. So there certainly are spaces where the military is interested in funding such things. And in Canada, we have a number of quite formal programs. One is called Aisteres, where we fund specific research to look for proposals for how to solve some of our cybersecurity challenges. I'm not sure if similar things exist in Latvia, but yeah, absolutely. Hopefully it's a very broad question. Hopefully I've scratched usefully at an answer there. Oh, I see Dr. Bloomberg's has the mic. I'm more worried now than I had been. All right.
Right, it's going to, thank you for your speech, for sure. It's going to be a very short and maybe provoking question. Is it easier to take the civilian expert and turn him into the military, or taking a military person and taking him into the technical expert?
Ooh, that's a very interesting question that we've actually sort of wrestled with. Yes.
Yes to what?
Or maybe no. I'm not sure. So I think the idea that we'll be able to put all of the skill sets that we require in a cyber operator into one individual cyber operator is a bit of a losing game. So I really believe that the answer to your question is not yes, but neither. I believe the team needs military personnel that have a lot of civilian training and civilians that have some military knowledge, along with some military people that have no cybersecurity knowledge and some civilians with no military knowledge. The question is more, what sort of leadership do we need to put in place to allow those various elements of the team to be pulled together and deliver the effect that we need? So that's perhaps a little bit too pat an answer to your question. What I would say is that I think if I take a step back and look at the major gaps in cybersecurity skills, I was supposed to say across the Western world, but it's across the world. I read a statistic. I wish I had the reference right away because it would be slightly more credible, but we're something like 2 million cybersecurity experts short globally. What that means is that in some ways you should be looking to build the cybersecurity force you can, rather than wishing for the optimal cybersecurity force. One of the things that as a military in Canada we can do that is very difficult for industry is we can build people. The military's got a system where we're okay spending 8 years to develop someone from when they join to when they're actually going to be, let's call it, fully mission capable. That's not something that exists elsewhere. So I think we can and we are trying to bring a new section of talent into the cybersecurity sphere sort of through uniform. So it's a mix. It's not either or. It's complicated. what a hard question. Thank you.
Thank you. No problem. If you want to get more hard questions, come to Latvia more often. You will have them.
Oh, I get them everywhere.
Okay, good. So we are a normal country in this sense. Good. Good to know. Thank you very much, General. Nevertheless, we will meet again on this stage later on for a panel discussion.